Hello, my name is Alicia Warner, and I am here to talk to you about the neurological and endocrine pathways related to the normal physiology of breastfeeding. Now, it's important to know how breastfeeding works because low supply or being unsure of the body's physiology and if it's working properly is how a lot of moms tend to make the decision to stop their breastfeeding journey or switch to other forms of feeding their baby, such as formula. There are many components involved in breast milk production. The system as a whole is run by the neuroendocrine mechanism, which includes both the neurological and endocrine pathways. Additionally, there are two primary hormones that are secreted to aid the body in milk production, which are prolactin and oxytocin. There are also another set of pathways involved that are distinguished as afferent and efferent nerve pathways. Each of these plays a key role in the physiology of breastfeeding. Neuroendocrine mechanisms. Now, lactation has two components that begin and maintain the system as a whole. The first being the neurological component, which connects the brain to the body. When the mother thinks of the baby or hears her baby crying, the brain sends a message to the body, which sparks the endocrine component to produce hormones related to the letdown reflex. This reflex is what starts the release of milk from the mother's nipples. Both the endocrine and neurological pathways use chemical signals that bind to receptor molecules to tell the body what is needed: milk. The neurological pathway. So the hypothalamus is the primary visceral control center of the body. It's the most important part of creating homeostasis in the body, as it affects all body tissues. Now, the way that the hypothalamus interacts with the physiology of breastfeeding is that it initiates the physical reaction of the body to emotions. So before I mentioned that the mother's letdown reflex can occur when the mother hears her baby crying or thinks of her baby. The hypothalamus takes those emotions and lets the endocrine system know that it needs to release those milk hormones through the autonomic nervous system, or ANS, pathway. Now, the hypothalamus is important because it controls the endocrine system function, which is necessary when releasing the hormones that initiate milk production. Now we have the endocrine pathway. The endocrine system releases those hormones into the bloodstream, which carry messages throughout the mother's body. The endocrine functions of the brain's hypothalamus are what produces and releases hormones. Hormones are carried throughout the body in the blood and are either steroid or amino acid based. Now, the hormones that are used for breastfeeding are derived from amino acids, and they're also peptides. So how are these hormones controlled? Negative feedback is the mechanism that controls the hormones and when they are released. As hormone levels increase, negative feedback takes over the system and regulates it so that the secretion of the hormones decrease. Now, the system continues repeating in the same process. So, what are these elusive hormones that we keep on speaking of? The two hormones that are absolutely necessary in breastfeeding and breast milk production are called prolactin and oxytocin. Prolactin is secreted from the anterior pituitary gland and increases at the very end of pregnancy, which in turn stimulates the mammary glands to grow and prepare for the baby. At this time, both estrogen and progesterone are heightened and block these increased levels of prolactin from producing milk. However, when the baby is born and the placenta is birthed, the levels of estrogen and progesterone plummet and allow for prolactin to take over so that you can have the response of breastfeeding your baby. However, prolactin does not work alone. So oxytocin is required to cause the milk to actually let down and come out of the breast. Oxytocin is the hormone that stimulates uterine contractions, but it also allows milk to flow out of the breast. When the baby begins to nurse, nerve cells in the breast tell the brain to release oxytocin from the posterior pituitary gland. When oxytocin releases, it contracts the alveoli to squeeze the milk out into the ducts, down the areola, through the nipple, and into the baby's mouth. Now, this letdown can feel like a tingle, a pressure, or nothing at all. It's all individual to the mother. So the afferent pathway, there are two pathways that I spoke about when we first began, and the afferent pathway refers to the biggest distribution of supply in the mammary gland. This is in the teats, where there are receptors that react to the baby sucking and send signals to the body to produce milk. From the baby suckling its mother's nipple, it activates and creates a nerve impulse that travels to the brain to signal that milk needs to be released. When the oxytocin neurons are stimulated by these signals that originate in the teat, an action potential moves from the hypothalamus and causes a release of oxytocin into the blood. This is where the efferent pathway begins. The efferent pathway, which is the second pathway, begins when that oxytocin is released into the blood and travels to the mammary gland through the blood. It then binds to oxytocin receptors on the myoepithelial cells, which causes them to contract and results in pressure, which then ejects the milk from the alveolar lumen. It is important to note that oxytocin receptors are associated with these myoepithelial cells, not the smooth cells of the mammary gland. So as you can tell, the body works in absolutely incredible ways. Each part we talked about is crucial to the end result, breastfeeding and lactation. After a series of cause and effect, the milk is transferred to the baby from the mother's breast. It takes two crucial hormones, which we talked about were oxytocin and prolactin, to get there, as well as a series of neuroendocrine mechanisms and afferent pathways. The hypothalamus is also a key player here. Our brain has a very huge part in connecting to our body and telling our body what it needs to do. And here are my references. And thank you so much for watching.